Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world where the Nile glows gold, where the heat of the desert slowly exhales into a softer dusk, and where a drink more ancient than your grandmother's favorite soup waits to be discovered. You can almost hear the faint lap of water against the reed banks, the frogs croaking like 1,000 tiny percussionists, and somewhere out there, a brewer humming while clay jars bubble in the shadows. We're stepping into the land of the ancient Egyptians, and you're about to find out just how they brewed beer that kept both peasants and pharaohs humming along. Oh, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without at least wanting a cold pint yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a quick comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where and when you're listening. It's like our own little map of sleepy travelers across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk with bare feet pressed into soft Nile mud, the kind that squishes satisfyingly between your toes even though you know some crocodile has probably eyed the same spot earlier. The air is heavy with the sweetness of reeds and a faint sourness drifting from brewing yards nearby. In this place, beer is not a weekend luxury, it is survival, paycheck, medicine, and sacred ritual all poured into a clay jar. Egyptians don't just drink beer, they live on it. Think of it as ancient Gatorade, except brewed in the blazing sun and possibly with a chunk of barley loaf still floating around. The Nile itself is the spine of the land, pulsing with life every season. You see farmers hauling water with shadoofs, balancing buckets on long wooden poles to pour into their fields. Without the annual flood, there would be no fertile black earth, no barley, and, most importantly for tonight, no beer. The flooding was both blessing and nuisance. Too much and homes vanished. Too little and crops withered. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian calendar was first designed to predict the Nile flood or the beer brewing cycle. Both, if you ask the weary farmer leaning on his hoe. But he's probably biased. The glow of sunset shimmers on whitewashed walls as women carry jars balanced on their heads, hands free as if gravity had signed a deal with them. Children chase after, giggling. But eventually you notice how even their laughter carries traces of the day's exhaustion. Beer is waiting for them at home. Don't be too shocked. This was no modern cocktail but more like liquid porridge. Nourishing enough that even the smallest mouths sipped it. You get the sense the Egyptians survived less on bread and more on beer. Which is why scribes sometimes called it liquid bread. You glance toward a row of statues lining the temple causeway, their stony eyes fixed on eternity. Somewhere inside that temple, priests are preparing offerings not just of incense or flowers but of beer. Yes, the gods themselves were apparently thirsty. Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and love, was often given vats of beer during festivals. Imagine divine happy hour. And in one myth, when humanity misbehaved, she nearly destroyed them all until Ra tricked her by dyeing thousands of jars of beer red to look like blood. Hathor drank until she passed out, and humanity survived. Not exactly a bedtime moral, unless the moral is, beer saves lives. The deeper you walk into the twilight, the more you notice how central this drink is. Workers on construction sites receive jars of beer as payment. Scribes and officials log how much beer goes to each person, no room for mistakes. Because imagine shortchanging a guy who's been dragging pyramid stones all day. The records survive on papyri and stone carvings, and historians still debate how many jars a worker truly received. Some say 3 per day, others 5. Either way, OSHA would definitely have questions. The quirky part? Egyptians didn't even have a word for beer, like we do. Their word, henket, more literally meant that which has been brewed. Kind of vague, right? But then again, when almost everyone drinks the same thing daily, maybe no extra label was needed. Imagine if we all just called coffee the brew. You wouldn't need Starbucks signs, you'd just say, going for the brew, and everyone would know. Night deepens, and the Nile's surface gleams like black glass sprinkled with stars. You hear the croak of toads, the buzz of mosquitoes, and the splash of fishermen hauling in nets heavy with silver fish. The village fires crackle, releasing smoke that smells of both roasting meat and half-baked loaves meant for tomorrow's brewing. A dog barks lazily, more at shadows than at danger. And you, well, you can't help but feel pulled closer to those brewing yards, where tomorrow's drink is already whispering through fermenting foam. Somewhere nearby, a brewer wipes sweat from his forehead and chuckles at your curious stare. He knows you'll want to follow him tomorrow, into fields, ovens, and clay jars. For now, though, you let the Nile lull you. As the golden evenings of Egypt fade into sleep, the sun wakes you far earlier than you'd prefer. And in Egypt, that's not some gentle dawn but a straight-up blast furnace. The horizon glows pink and gold, and the first rays bounce off temple pylons like polished copper shields. You shuffle out toward the fields, still yawning, but everyone else is already awake. Farmers bend their backs in neat rows, working the land with simple tools, coaxing barley from the black silt the Nile has left behind. The smell here is rich and earthy, damp and sweet at once, and you can practically feel the potential of every stalk brushing against your legs. Barley is the backbone of Egyptian beer, and honestly, it's the unsung hero of the civilization. Without it, forget pyramids, forget papyrus scrolls. No one would have the energy to even argue about taxes. You hear the soft rustle of stalks, the creak of wooden plows drawn by oxen, and the occasional grunt of a farmer whose sun hat is little more than a rag tied across his brow. You think your job is rough? Try farming under a sun that turns your sandals into frying pans. And yet, there's a calm rhythm to the work. Egyptians trust the Nile's gift of fertile soil, just as you trust your morning coffee machine not to explode. A boy trots past, balancing a clay jug, bringing water from a nearby canal. He sloshes half of it down his tunic but doesn't seem to mind. Watering these barley rows is no small task, which is why they've perfected irrigation channels that stretch like veins across the fields. Historians still argue whether Egyptian irrigation was as advanced as later Mesopotamian systems. But what's clear is that without it, the barley crop would shrivel in a week. You pause at the edge of one of these ditches, watching the water snake along, carrying floating leaves, tadpoles, and maybe a very confused frog. The mainstream fact you can't escape: barley wasn't just for beer. It was also used for bread, animal feed, and sometimes even as a form of currency. But when it came to brewing, certain strains of barley were prized for their starch content, which yeasts could later transform into alcohol. The Egyptians might not have had microscopes to understand yeast, but they sure understood results. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some records, emmer wheat pops up alongside barley in beer recipes. Emmer is tougher, chewier, the kind of grain that makes your teeth regret ever meeting bread. And yet, Egyptians mixed it in. Why? Maybe flavor. Maybe because farmers didn't like monocrops. Maybe just because Uncle Khepri always did it that way. Modern experimental archaeologists who recreated these beers say the emmer blend gives a nuttier, earthier taste. So, if you ever sip an ancient replica beer, thank the Egyptians for their grainy stubbornness. You crouch down to pluck a barley head, rubbing the awns between your fingers until grains fall into your palm. They're light, golden, and hard as tiny pebbles. Not very tasty yet, but packed with energy. A passing farmer laughs at your attempt to chew one. Imagine gnawing on gravel and you've got the picture. He waves you toward a threshing floor where harvested barley is piled into mountains. Oxen plod in slow circles, trampling the stalks, while workers with wooden flails beat the grain free. Dust rises, sparkling in the sun like tiny golden motes. You cough, but everyone else works through it. Immune by habit, you're told that once harvested, barley must be carefully stored. Clay silos rise like fat beehives near the village edge, filled with grain that could feed both bellies and brewing vats for months. The silos stay cool inside, but you can imagine rats eyeing the place like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Cats, sacred to Bastet, are the furry guardians here, slinking along the walls with tails twitching like whips. Egyptians practically invented the concept of cats as pest control, and probably the first memes about cats lounging on grain piles. Now, here's where the scholarly debates sneak in again. Some argue that Egyptians malted their barley, soaking it until it sprouted slightly, unlocking sugars before drying it for brewing. Others say they skipped this and just half-baked barley loaves to release starch. Both camps bring burnt crumbs of ancient bread or residue from jars as evidence. But no one's found a complete recipe etched in stone. Imagine future archaeologists debating whether your grandma used butter or margarine. And you get the picture. The heat climbs as the morning deepens, and you wander through swaying fields where barley stretches toward the sky. Cicadas sing like tiny rattles, and farmers chant work songs that blend with the sound of wind. You can almost believe the land itself is humming. Somewhere, a scribe notes today's yield, recording numbers with the neat precision of hieratic script. Numbers matter. Too much barley wasted, and someone's rations are cut. Too much beer unbrewed, and workers riot. Yes, beer riots were a thing. Humans have always known their priorities. You shade your eyes, gazing back at the river. The Nile glimmers, promising another cycle of flooding and retreat. Life and labor. For now, though, you're knee-deep in barley fields, watching as Egypt's golden grain readies itself to become liquid history. And you sense the story pressing forward, because once harvested, the real magic begins in grinding, pounding, and preparing the humble grain for transformation. The barley harvest fills the air with that dusty sweetness that clings to your skin. And now you shuffle into a village courtyard where the next step of the process unfolds. The sound greets you first, stone on stone, thud and scrape, the rhythm of hands working tirelessly. It's not music exactly, but after a while, the grinding becomes hypnotic, a steady percussion that could lull even a cranky toddler into a nap. You squat beside the women kneeling over cornstones, watching them rock heavy slabs back and forth to crush barley into coarse flour. Their backs bend, shoulders gleam with sweat, and the grit creeps under fingernails no matter how often they rinse. This flour isn't destined for fancy pastries. No butter croissants here. It's the raw base for brewing. And the Egyptians knew exactly how to handle it. Each push of the grinding stone releases starches, little invisible promises of future fermentation. A modern scientist would talk about carbohydrates and enzymes. But here it's just simple, practiced labor. You run your fingers through the pile of powder, and it feels rough, sandy, not like the silky flour from your grocery store. Don't even think about sneezing. Everyone will give you side-eye if you blow their hard work across the courtyard. The mainstream fact you tuck away: grinding barley was considered so essential that households owned their own cornstones. They were wedding gifts, heirlooms, the kind of thing you passed down like your grandmother's soup pump. Without grinding, there was no bread, no beer, no life. Archaeologists often find worn-down stones in tombs, evidence of lifetimes spent on this daily grind, literally. But here comes the quirky tidbit. Some evidence suggests that professional brewers flavored their barley loaves by tossing in herbs or dates before baking. Imagine being the ancient Egyptian version of a craft brewer, bragging about your special blend with a handful of date pulp. It's kind of adorable. 4.000 years before hipster breweries, someone was already experimenting with small batch flavors. The debate, of course, is whether the grinding always came before malting or after. Historians still argue whether Egyptians malted barley at scale or simply crushed it straight from harvest. Residues from ancient jars show chemical signatures of sprouting grains, but they also show traces of baked bread. Was there one standard method, or dozens? You picture scholars in tweed jackets shaking their fists at each other across a conference table, passionately arguing over who sprouted what, and when. Meanwhile, the Egyptians probably just shrugged and said, "It works." As you sit with the workers, you realize this task is brutal. The rocking motion digs into knees, and your arms ache after only a few minutes of trying. No wonder Egyptian art often shows women at the grindstone. It was constant, daily, never ending. And yet, there's laughter between them. A joke tossed across the courtyard makes one woman snort so hard she nearly drops her stone. The camaraderie makes the work bearable, just as office banter gets you through endless emails. Nearby, a child plays in the dust, stacking little heaps of barley husks into towers. His older sister scolds him when he tries to eat one. Chewing barley husks is basically munching on stiff grass. Still, curiosity is timeless. You remember being a kid and trying dog kibble once, don't lie. Everyone experiments. Your attention drifts to the storage baskets. Woven tightly from reeds, they're filled with coarse flour, ready to be mixed with water into sticky dough. The smell is faintly nutty, almost earthy, like roasted seeds. You realize you're hungry, but don't get too excited. This dough isn't meant to rise into soft bread. It's heading toward ovens for the first strange stage of brewing, half-baked loaves. But before that, the grinding continues, hour after hour, until the courtyard echoes like a chorus of stones. Dust clings to your lips, making you cough, and one of the workers laughs, offering you a sip from her jar. It's yesterday's beer, warm and thick, more like a barley smoothie than anything in your fridge. You take a tentative swallow. It's tangy, filling, and honestly not half bad. The yeasty fizz tickles your tongue, and you wonder if your stomach is about to revolt. But no, you're still standing. That's a win. The sun climbs higher, heating the courtyard until the stones themselves feel hot enough to fry an egg. Workers wipe their brows, humming as they finish the day's batch of flour. Cats curl under shady corners, tails twitching as if they're keeping time with the grinding rhythm. Somewhere, a rooster crows late, clearly confused, but nobody pays him any mind. Life here is all about the grain, and every stroke of the quern pushes Egypt one step closer to its beloved drink. By the time shadows stretch long again, the air is thick with flour dust. You feel it in your throat, in your hair, probably even between your toes. The workers pack the day's flour into baskets, covering them with cloth to keep out bugs. Tomorrow, those baskets will move to the bakers, where loaves rise, not for eating, but for dissolving into the alchemy of beer. For now, though, you let the grinding stones sing you into another evening, their slow scrape echoing like a lullaby across the quieting village. The baskets of barley flour don't sit long before they're hauled toward the heat of village ovens. You follow along, the air sharp with wood smoke, the ground crunching beneath your sandals where bits of old charcoal scatter like black confetti. The bakers are already hard at work, their arms dusted white to the elbows, their faces shining with sweat as they knead sticky dough. But this dough is no ordinary recipe. It isn't destined for fluffy bread or delicate pastries. No, these are loaves with a peculiar mission. They're going to be baked just enough to hold together, then crumbled into brewing vats. You lean in close, and the smell is surprising. It's not the toasty, mouth-watering aroma you'd expect from bread. Instead, it's dense, earthy, faintly sour. The dough is lumpy, loaded with grains still half crushed, more rustic than anything your local bakery would dare sell. Bakers shape the loaves into odd, stubby forms, almost like squat cylinders or fat cones, easy to break apart later. Some are shoved into clay molds before being slipped into dome-shaped ovens that glow like miniature suns. Here's your mainstream fact of the day. These loaves were often called beer bread by Egyptologists because they weren't meant for the dinner table. Tomb paintings and clay models show bakers side by side with brewers, the two crafts tightly linked. Beer bread was a specialized step, half-baked to preserve starches that yeast would later feast on. You imagine trying to bite one, and your teeth send you a clear message, don't. And the quirky tidbit? Sometimes bakers tossed in fruit like dates or figs. Not for sweetness exactly, but probably to boost fermentation and maybe add a little flavor. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian version of tossing a cinnamon stick into mulled cider, tiny touches that gave the brew its signature character. You chuckle, realizing that craft brewing bragging rights go way back. Somewhere out there, a baker probably boasted, "My fig loaf makes the gods weep with joy." Of course, historians still argue whether the bread first method was the only one. Some suggest Egyptians may have skipped loaves entirely, soaking malted barley directly in water. Others say both methods coexisted, depending on region or resources. Without a YouTube tutorial from 2500 BCE, we're left piecing it together from crumbs, literally. Archaeologists find charred chunks of beer bread in ancient sites, preserved like blackened fossils, and debates flare up like hot ovens over what exactly they were for. The ovens roar, fueled by wood and sometimes dried dung. Yes, really, the smell of smoke is thick and oddly sweet, And you're glad the bakers don't invite you to gather firewood. You'd have to decide whether you prefer handling sticks or scooping dough. A baker pulls a loaf from the oven with bare hands, tossing it onto a mat without so much as a flinch. Their palms are calloused, toughened by years of heat. You touch one cautiously, and it's hard as stone. Edges scorched, center still doughy. Perfect. At least for a vat. Not a dinner plate. Around the courtyard, clay jars line the walls, waiting like patient soldiers for their cargo. A boy runs past, carrying a basket of steaming loaves, nearly tripping over a dog who sprawls in the shade with tongue lolling. The bakers laugh, tossing good-natured insults, the kind you'd hear in any kitchen when the rush is on. The air is alive with motion, women shaping, men feeding ovens, children darting with baskets. It's messy, noisy, but purposeful. Every loaf a promise of tomorrow's brew. You pause to notice the small details, the clay molds etched with simple designs. Perhaps to mark ownership. The mats woven from reeds, blackened at the edges from years of hot bread landing. The sweat dripping onto the dough. Unavoidably part of the recipe, human effort literally baked into every loaf. You wipe your brow in sympathy, though your workload has mostly been spectating. One baker teases you by shoving a steaming loaf toward your hands. It's heavy, awkward, and you nearly drop it. The heat sears your palms, and you juggle it clumsily until everyone around you bursts out laughing. They know you're no baker. You mutter something about preferring takeout. But of course, they don't understand. Still, the humor bridges the centuries. You don't need a common language to recognize a good laugh. By late afternoon, the courtyard is stacked with cooling loaves, their rough crusts cracking as steam seeps out. The air smells thick, starchy, filling. Flies buzz lazily, drawn to the warmth, until cats leap to swat them midair. Somewhere, a priest passes by, nodding approval. Beer isn't just food, it's offering. These loaves may one day dissolve not only in vats for workers but in jars destined for the gods. Even bread baked badly still has holy purpose here. As the sun dips, the bakers slow their frantic pace, slumping against walls, drinking mugs of yesterday's beer to wash the dust from their throats. You sit among them, clutching a half loaf that could double as a weapon, and feel the cycle pressing forward. Tomorrow, these crusty cylinders will crumble into clay jars, where bubbles will rise, foam will spill, and yeast will perform its invisible symphony. Tonight, though, the ovens cool, shadows lengthen, and the village exhales in relief. Morning again, and the village smells different. Gone is the dusty sweetness of flour or the smoky sting of ovens. Instead, the air is damp, sour, alive. You follow the sound of splashing into a yard where tall clay jars rise like silent sentinels. Each one is wide at the belly, narrow at the mouth, and stained with rings of dried froth. You crouch close, and there it is, the bubbling, fizzing whisper of beer in the making. If you lean too far, a puff of yeasty air greets your nose, sharp and tangy, like sourdough gone rogue. The process is deceptively simple. Baker's loaves, those awkward half-baked cylinders, are broken apart and soaked in water. Workers stir the mush with long wooden paddles, their arms flexing as they churn. You see chunks float and sink, like soggy croutons in an unappetizing soup. But this mess is exactly what yeast craves. Egyptians didn't know yeast as a microorganism, but they knew the results. Within a day, the mixture would foam and ferment, transforming starches into alcohol. Here's your mainstream fact. Egyptian beer was almost always brewed in these large ceramic vats or jars, with some evidence of brewing facilities inside temples and estates. Archaeologists have uncovered brewing rooms with rows of such jars, residue still clinging to their insides after thousands of years. Imagine scrubbing that kind of history off your Tupperware. The quirky tidbit? Some brewing jars had tiny holes near the base, designed to drain liquid while trapping the grainy mush. It was an ancient strainer, a clever hack to keep chunks out of the final drink. You almost want to applaud the ingenuity. Filtering beer with a built-in clay colander beats chewing your way through chunky porridge every time. Still, historians argue whether the Egyptians drank their beer chunky anyway. Some residue analysis shows high amounts of starch left in the liquid, suggesting it was thick, almost like a smoothie. Others believe straining techniques made a clearer brew. Maybe both were true. Workers slurping down thick, hearty versions while elites sipped something finer. You can almost hear the debates. Was it a meal or a drink? The answer, naturally, is yes. You step closer to one jar, the rim crusted with foam. A brewer beckons, lifting a ladle to offer you a taste. The liquid is warm, frothy, pale amber. You hesitate, then sip. It's sour, grainy, and oddly refreshing, though you wouldn't exactly pay bar prices for it. Still, after a moment, the tang grows on you. You feel a fizz in your belly, a lightness in your head, and maybe, just maybe, a buzz sneaking in. Either that or you're lightheaded from crouching in the sun. The courtyard hums with activity. Men stir jars. Women fetch water from canals. Children scamper around with baskets of fuel for fires that keep the mash warm. A dog laps spilled beer from the dirt, then wobbles off, tail wagging drunkenly. You snort, realizing drunk animals aren't a modern invention. Even the flies seem tipsy, landing lazily before tumbling off again. Brewers here don't rely on precision instruments or thermometers. They rely on sight, smell, and experience. Too much heat, and the yeast dies. Too little, and fermentation stalls. The workers dip fingers into the froth, sniffing and tasting, nodding in satisfaction when it hits the right tang. One old man claims he can tell by listening to the bubbles, cocking his ear like a doctor with a stethoscope. You laugh, but maybe he's right. Experience sharpens senses in ways you can't measure. The sun creeps higher, and the jars shimmer in the light, their shadows stretching long across the packed earth. Foam oozes over the rims, sliding down like melted ice cream, attracting bees who dive straight into the froth. Children giggle, pointing as the insects stagger free, wings sticky and useless. Someone waves them off with a reed fan. But more bees arrive, drawn like it's a honey festival. As the day warms, the bubbling grows louder, a chorus of fizzing that never stops. It's alive, quite literally, and you can't help but marvel at how this invisible process became the lifeblood of an empire. No science labs, no equations, just clay, grain, water, and wild yeast. Out of that, pyramids were fueled, gods appeased, and families nourished. You tilt your head back, thinking, maybe civilization really does rest on beer foam. By late afternoon, the brewers lean back against the courtyard wall. Satisfied, the jars will sit overnight. The yeast still dancing, still feasting. Tomorrow, the beer will be ready to pour, ladled into smaller jugs, distributed to workers, families, and priests. Tonight, though, the bubbling jars sing their quiet, constant song, fizzing like 1,000 tiny lullabies. You close your eyes, letting the sound wash over you. It's almost like listening to rain on a tin roof, soft, irregular, soothing. The Nile breeze cools your sweat. The smell of sour mash clings to your nose. And in the fading light, you sense the story carrying you deeper into Egypt's brewing heart. The night slips away, and by dawn you find yourself in a busier courtyard. One not just filled with bubbling jars but with people, lots of people. Brewers, priests, servants, even guards stand about, each with their role in this dance of grain and gods. The air smells thick with yeast and smoke, a heady perfume that clings to your tunic. This isn't just a home brew day anymore, this is official. Brewing in Egypt isn't separate from religion, it's tied to it. Bound like the reeds along the Nile, you watch brewers work with practiced rhythm, stirring mash, skimming foam, and ladling froth into smaller jars. Their arms are corded with muscle, their movements almost ritualistic. Some wear plain linen kilts streaked with stains, others, cleaner robes, stand back, clearly supervisors. And then you notice the priests, draped in immaculate linen, shaved heads gleaming. They murmur prayers as they sprinkle herbs into the vats. To your modern eyes, it looks like seasoning, but to them, it's sacred work. Here's the mainstream fact: in Egypt, brewing wasn't just an everyday necessity but also a temple duty. Temples managed large-scale breweries, producing beer not only for rituals but as part of economic exchange. Beer was offered to gods daily, and priests kept careful records of how much was brewed, distributed, and consumed. Inscriptions even list daily quotas, beer as precise as clockwork. And the quirky tidbit? In one myth, the goddess Hathor nearly destroyed humanity in her rage, until she was tricked with vats of beer dyed red to look like blood. She drank, became joyfully drunk, and spared humanity. That's right, according to Egyptian mythology. Beer literally saved the world. Next time you sip a pint, you can claim you're honoring cosmic history. Still, historians argue whether temple brewing was entirely controlled by priests or whether independent brewers thrived alongside. Some evidence shows massive state-run operations, while other finds hint at small-scale breweries in villages. Was the sacred tied to the everyday? Or did the temple guard its monopoly? The debate fizzes like yeast. Unresolved but fascinating. You drift closer, careful not to step into anyone's path. A priest catches your gaze, smiling faintly, and offers you a sip from a golden chalice. The beer inside is smoother than what you tasted before. Strained, clearer, lightly sweetened with date juice. It's still sour, still yeasty, but there's something refined about it. You realize, not all beer was created equal. Workers got chunky porridge brews, while gods and pharaohs received the finer stuff. The hierarchy extended even into your drinking cup. Around you, the temple complex hums with life. Scribes sit cross-legged, reed pens scratching onto papyrus as they record jars in neat columns. Their brows furrow in concentration. You'd think they were balancing a nation's budget. Which in a way, they are. Beer isn't just drink, it's currency. Wages, offering, and community glue. Miss a record, and chaos follows. Imagine forgetting payroll at the pyramid site. No one's hauling limestone without their daily rations. You spot workers carrying jars on yokes, balanced across their shoulders, staggering under the weight. Each jar is stoppered with clay and sealed with mud, stamped with a mark of ownership. Some head toward the temple storehouse, others toward the fields or construction sites. Beer flows outward like the Nile itself, feeding every corner of society. And here, under priestly watch, you sense the scale of it. This is not just brewing. This is civilization powered by foam. A brewer nearby cracks a joke, pointing at one of the priests. You don't understand the words, but the laughter tells you it's about the priest's clean hands compared to the brewer's grime. The priest pretends to scowl, then smirks. Even here, in sacred space, humor bubbles up like yeast. You chuckle too, and for a moment you feel less like an outsider. The sun climbs, and with it the smell intensifies, warm, heady, almost intoxicating just to breathe. You imagine the courtyard as a kind of ancient brewery-pub hybrid, half sacred, half industrial, all essential. Dogs lurk for spills, cats stalk rodents, and birds swoop overhead, hoping for stray grains. The world here revolves around clay jars and foamy froth, around workers whose backs ache and priests whose prayers sanctify. You lean against a wall, closing your eyes, and let the sounds blend together. The stirring paddles, the bubbling jars, the murmured prayers, the scratch of scribes. It becomes a lullaby, layered and alive. Civilization itself seems to hum with beer's rhythm. When you open your eyes, the courtyard is glowing in sunlight, the jars steaming slightly as fermentation keeps working. Somewhere beyond, pyramids rise, temples gleam, fields rustle. But here, in this yard of brewers and priests, you understand something deeper. Egypt's greatness wasn't built on gold alone. It was built on grain, yeast, and the quiet devotion of people who stirred jars until their arms ached. Beer was more than sustenance. It was survival, sacredness, and society poured into a cup. And as you sip another tangy gulp, you feel the story still fermenting, still rising, waiting to spill into God's chalices and workers' mugs alike. The trail from the temple yard leads you deeper into its cool chambers, where incense coils like ghostly snakes through the air. Shadows cling to walls painted with gods and offerings, and you notice jars of beer lined neatly beside trays of bread, flowers, and meat. Priests move quietly, their linen robes whispering, their voices low as they chant hymns. You realize that beer is no longer just refreshment or ration, it is a sacred bridge between humans and the divine. You pause in front of a statue of Hathor, her face serene, her cow's horns curving around the sun disk she wears. At her feet rests a golden cup, freshly filled with frothy beer. The scent of dates and grain rises toward her stone lips as if she might lean down to sip. Priests bow, lifting chalices skyward, and you feel the weight of ritual pressing down. This isn't a casual toast, it's a daily necessity. The gods are thirsty, and keeping them satisfied means keeping the universe in balance. Here's your mainstream fact. Offerings of beer appear throughout Egyptian temple records. Carved into stone and painted on walls. Beer was presented to gods daily, not only at grand festivals but also in regular temple routines. Just as bread was life to the body, beer was life to the spirit. A god ignored was a god angered, and no one wanted Hathor or Osiris giving them the cold shoulder. The quirky tidbit: during festivals, the offerings weren't symbolic. Priests and worshippers sometimes drank alongside the gods. Think of it as the ultimate divine happy hour. One famous celebration, the Festival of Drunkenness, honored Hathor with gallons of beer dyed red. Participants danced, sang, and yes, drank until the world blurred. Archaeologists even found drinking vessels big enough to make your local pub jealous. So next time you hear, drink responsibly, remember that ancient Egypt occasionally scheduled mass inebriation into the calendar. Still, historians argue whether these offerings were consumed by priests after being presented or whether the gods symbolically absorbed them, leaving behind leftovers. Some evidence suggests priests redistributed the offerings among staff, ensuring nothing went to waste. Others argue the items might have been destroyed as sacred. No consensus yet, just another mystery sealed like foam in an ancient jar. You wander farther, into a hall where Pharaoh himself might dine. Long tables gleam under flickering torchlight, piled with roasted meats, fruits, and golden chalices filled to the brim with beer. Servants glide silently, refilling cups before they're empty, while musicians pluck harps and beat drums. You imagine the pharaoh raising his cup, foam catching in his beard, his laughter echoing as courtiers pretend to find every word hilarious. Beer wasn't just food or offering, it was politics, wealth, and power expressed in liquid form. You catch sight of a banquet painting on the wall, nobles reclining on cushions, women holding delicate cups, lotus flowers tucked into wigs, musicians strum, dancers sway, and always, the beer flows. The artists even painted the froth spilling over rims, proof that Egyptian banquets were no dry affairs. And you, sitting cross-legged on the cool stone floor, almost hear the laughter rising off the walls. Someone presses a cup into your hand. It's cooler, clearer than the worker's brew you've tasted before. The liquid glows like amber honey in the torchlight, the foam light and sweet. You take a sip, and it's smoother, slightly fruity, with hints of dates. Suddenly, you understand why pharaohs and gods got the finer stuff. You also realize you might be in trouble if you keep drinking at this pace. You're starting to feel lighter, giddier. A priest raises his eyebrow at you, clearly amused. The night deepens, and the banquet swells with noise. Dancers whirl, bracelets jingling, musicians speed up, voices rise in song. Somewhere in the chaos, a servant staggers under a tray of jars, sloshing beer onto the floor. Guests roar with laughter, not anger. Maybe that's the secret. When beer flows this freely, mistakes turn into entertainment. Yet beneath the music and laughter, you sense the duality. Beer is joy, but beer is also devotion. Every sip connects the mortal to the divine. Every jar links workers to rulers. Every offering keeps the gods appeased. Civilization itself seems to rest on the foam bubbling in those jars. As you step back into the night air, stars pricking the sky above the temple roof, you feel the lingering warmth of beer in your belly. The gods have been honored. The pharaoh has been satisfied. And the people have their rations waiting. Tomorrow, the jars will flow outward again, into dusty worksites and humble homes. Beer doesn't stay locked in temples, it belongs to everyone, from the highest to the lowest. And that's where your steps carry you next. The temple walls fade behind you as your sandals crunch over packed earth. You follow the path that winds toward the outskirts, away from polished stone and toward fields and villages. The air feels different here, less incense, more earth, more dust, more sweat. A faint sour sweet smell greets you before you even see it. And then the brewery comes into view. Not a courtyard of priests, Not a banquet hall for nobles. This is where beer meets muscle and survival. You watch workers lined up with baskets of emmer grain balanced on their shoulders. They move like ants, steady, rhythmic, pouring grain into storage bins, grinding stones, and steaming vats. Women bend over mortars, pounding, while men haul water from the Nile. Children scurry about, carrying smaller jars, their laughter mixing with the clatter of tools. This is beer as ration. Beer as payment. Beer as life itself. Here's the mainstream fact. In Egypt, laborers, especially those who built pyramids, temples, and canals, were paid partly in beer. Records show workers receiving daily rations, sometimes up to 4 liters per person. That's not a typo. Imagine hauling limestone blocks all day under the sun. You'd need a hearty drink. 2. Beer wasn't optional, it was the fuel of empire. And the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists found graffiti at pyramid sites where workers proudly identified themselves as the drunkards of Menkaure. Not exactly the nickname your HR department would approve today, but it shows just how closely beer was tied to their identity. Far from enslaved misery, many workers were skilled laborers, well-fed and yes, pleasantly buzzed while shaping history in stone. Still, historians argue whether rations of beer acted more as hydration or as morale booster. Some say the alcohol killed bacteria in water, making it safer to drink. Others suggest it was all about calories, liquid bread, dense with energy. And of course, there's the psychological edge. Hand a worker a frothy jar after a grueling shift, and suddenly the empire looks a little shinier. You watch a foreman distribute jars, each sealed with clay and stamped with a mark, hieroglyphs scratched quickly but carefully. Workers line up, each collecting their share, clutching the jars like treasure. Some sit immediately, gulping the thick brew, foam sticking to their lips. Others tuck the jars under arms, saving them for family at home. Beer is wage, reward, and nourishment, all packed in one container. Nearby, a group of laborers share a jar, passing it in turns. They laugh, joke, even sing, voices rough, but melodies cheerful. One of them notices you and waves you over. Against your better judgment, you take the jar they offer. The taste is rougher than the temple's brew, chunkier, more like liquid porridge than drink. But it's filling. The warmth spreads quickly through you, and you understand why workers counted on it not just for calories but also for spirit. As you sit, one of the laborers starts miming a pyramid block being dragged up a ramp. Grunting exaggeratedly, the others burst out laughing. You can't help but laugh too, though a part of you remembers the sheer scale of the pyramids you've seen. How did they do it? Theories abound, but maybe the answer is right here in your hand. A jar of beer that made impossible labor a little more possible. The sun drops lower, and the brewery shifts into evening pace. Fires crackle under vats, shadows stretch long, and the smell of roasting grain lingers in the air. Families gather, children chasing each other around, dogs hoping for scraps. Someone begins a story, voice rising and falling, and soon the group is listening in rapt silence. You don't understand all the words, but the tone is clear. Beer is part of the story, part of the laughter, part of the comfort. You think back to the temple priests with their clean robes and solemn prayers. Here, the prayers are laughter, sweat, and clinking jars. The sacred and the ordinary are two sides of the same coin, or maybe two halves of the same amphora. Both need beer, just in different ways. The stars emerge as the night deepens. Workers finish their meals of bread, onions, and beer. Their voices mellow, their bodies weary but content. Someone offers you a second jar, and you politely shake your head. You've had enough for tonight. They laugh at your caution, but kindly. It seems beer binds outsiders. 2. As you stand, stretching sore legs, you realize you've just walked through the true heartbeat of Egypt. Not the gold of the pharaoh, not the incense of the temple, but the simple clay jars passed from hand to hand in dusty courtyards. Civilization is built not just on stone but on the foam that lingers at the rim of a jar. You follow the laughter fading into the night, ready to see where this river of beer flows next. The hum of the village fades as you wander onward, drawn by another sound, a drumbeat, steady and hypnotic, echoing across the dark fields. You follow it through palm groves until torches flicker ahead. Soon, the air shifts again, thick with perfume and smoke, laughter and song. A festival. You step into a wide clearing where dozens of people sway to music. Their voices raised in unison, jars clutched in every hand. You've stumbled into celebration, and beer is at the center of it all. Women in flowing linen dresses toss their hair as they dance. Men clap rhythm to the drums. Children dart between legs, sneaking sips when adults aren't watching. The torches throw shadows that whirl with the dancers, and the smell of freshly poured beer mixes with roasted meat, incense, and sweat. Here's the mainstream fact. Beer wasn't only for work or worship. It was woven into Egypt's festivals and holidays. Major celebrations like the Opet festival in Thebes saw processions, music, and offerings, and yes, rivers of beer. It wasn't just refreshment but a symbol of joy, renewal, and connection. The quirky tidbit? At the annual festival of drunkenness, dedicated to Hathor, participants intentionally drank until they collapsed in laughter, dance, or outright stupor. Imagine thousands of people staggering around, priests included, claiming to reenact Hathor's salvation of humanity by drinking dyed beer. In short, divine permission for the mother of all hangovers. Still, historians argue whether these festivals were purely religious devotion or deliberate social release valves. Some see them as sacred acts, connecting people to gods. Others suggest they were controlled chaos, a way for rulers to let citizens cut loose while reminding them who funded the beer supply. Maybe it was both. A divine party with political perks. A man with a wide grin hands you a cup, and before you can protest, he pushes it into your fingers. Foam spills down your wrist as the crowd shouts encouragement. You sip, and the flavor is different again, sweeter, spiced with herbs, perhaps meant to mask the sourness. It tickles your throat, and warmth spreads instantly. Someone claps your back, pulling you into the circle of dancers. You stumble at first, but the rhythm is contagious. Feet stamp, hips sway, hands clap, and soon you're moving in time. A woman tosses you a lotus flower. You catch it clumsily, tucking it behind your ear, drawing more laughter. A child points at you and giggles, whispering something that surely translates to, "Look at the foreigner." You grin, lifting your cup in mock solemnity. The drumming grows louder, faster, until it feels like the earth itself is keeping time. People raise their cups toward the starry sky, chanting Hathor's name. Beer splashes onto the ground, soaking into the dirt as an offering. You realize that even in play, the sacred is present. Every laugh, every sip, every stagger is part of honoring the goddess who once spared humanity with a drink. The music shifts, becoming wilder, and the dancing grows looser. You see people collapse onto mats, laughing uncontrollably, some swaying with half-closed eyes, still clutching their jars. It's not chaos exactly, it's something orchestrated, familiar, ritualized. The festival isn't a free-for-all, it's a tradition, a rhythm of society. Tomorrow there will be work again, fields and stone and sweat. But tonight, the village belongs to beer and music. You sit on the edge of the gathering, breathing hard, the cup empty in your lap. The stars above seem closer somehow, as if leaning down to watch. The torches flicker, the drums slow, and voices soften into murmurs and songs. A priestess passes by, sprinkling drops of beer from a golden cup onto the ground, blessing the crowd. When she meets your eyes, she smiles knowingly, as if you too have been initiated into this ancient secret. Joy is holy. As the festival winds down, you watch the villagers curl up on mats, wrapped in linen, their jars empty at their sides. The laughter lingers in the air like smoke, drifting upward to the gods. You feel yourself swaying, lulled by the fading drums, the scent of earth and grain heavy in your nose. Beer isn't just drink here, it's release, community, and divine laughter poured into clay. Your eyelids droop, but you push yourself up. The journey isn't finished. Egypt's beer has one more place to take you, one more cup to raise, one more story to tell. And so, with stars blazing overhead, you slip away from the sleeping crowd, following the Nile's shimmer toward the final chapter of this ancient brew. The river glimmers silver under the moonlight as you follow its slow curve. The night air is cooler here, carrying the mingled scents of mud, reeds, and faint smoke from distant hearths. You walk along the bank where jars bob gently in the shallows, cooling in the water before being carried away to kitchens, temples, or work sites. The Nile is the artery of Egypt, and beer is the blood that runs through it. You pause to watch fishermen haul in their nets, their laughter carrying over the ripples. After a long day, they sit together, pouring beer into simple cups, drinking in silence broken only by the occasional joke. The moment feels timeless, just people at the end of a shift, resting with a drink, as countless others have done across millennia. You sit nearby, and one of them nods to you, lifting his cup in a universal gesture of fellowship. Here's the mainstream fact: beer jars have been found in tombs, buried alongside bread, tools, and ornaments. Egyptians believed the afterlife required the same sustenance as daily life. To walk through eternity without beer would be unthinkable. Inscriptions even promise the dead an endless supply of bread and beer in the field of reeds, their version of paradise. And the quirky tidbit: archaeologists once discovered ceramic beer straws, nearly a meter long, possibly used to sip from large communal jars. Picture a circle of friends bending over a pot, slurping in unison. Ancient Egypt's version of a party keg. You almost wish you had one right now, though explaining the hygiene risks to your modern brain might kill the vibe. Still, historians argue whether these tomb offerings were symbolic, spiritual provisions, or if beer was genuinely brewed for funerary rites. Some suggest the jars contained actual liquid. Others think they were empty placeholders. Either way, the message is clear. Beer wasn't just for today, it was forever. As you wander farther, the path brings you to a small family courtyard, where a matron stirs a steaming vat while children peek over the rim. Their eyes wide, she ladles out portions into jars, sealing them carefully. This isn't temple-scale brewing or state rationing, it's domestic, intimate, the heartbeat of everyday life. She glances up, catches your gaze, and smiles, offering you a small clay cup. You sip, and the flavor is familiar by now: grainy, sour, filling, but it feels different in this setting. Softer, somehow, like a hug in liquid form. This is beer as comfort, as family, as memory handed down through hands that stirred, kneaded, and brewed across centuries. The children laugh as they try to mimic their mother's stirring, and you realize you're witnessing knowledge passed like inheritance, recipes of survival, taught without words. The night deepens, and the stars shine brighter, mirrored on the Nile's black surface. You wander again, and the world around you seems to blur into layers: priests chanting in temples, workers hauling jars, villagers laughing at festivals, families stirring pots. Beer flows through all of them, binding their lives into a single, foamy thread. You sit on the riverbank at last, the cool mud squishing under your hands, and gaze across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal howls. You think of Anubis, god of the dead, guiding souls with steady paws. If you crossed into the field of reeds tonight, would there be a jar waiting for you too? The thought comforts more than it frightens. You breathe deep, the night air cool in your lungs, and close your eyes. The Nile laps softly against its banks, like the world itself is rocking you to sleep. The story of Egyptian beer is not just ancient, it's alive, fermented into human history, bubbling up whenever people gather with laughter, labor, or prayer. You can almost hear the faint hiss of foam rising in some unseen jar, a reminder that civilization has always brewed comfort from simple grain and water. And as you drift into that thought, the journey winds gently toward rest. Now the night softens, and the story quiets. The torches of festivals have dimmed, the temple songs have faded, and the laughter of workers has settled into dreams. What remains is only the river, the stars, and the gentle memory of a drink shared across centuries. You sit still by the Nile, listening to its patient flow, its surface glittering like a million scattered coins under the moonlight. The air carries no urgency anymore, only calm, only ease. The beer jars, heavy with history, seem to exhale slowly, their foam dissolving into silence. Every cup you've held tonight, the rough worker's ration, the priest's golden chalice, the villager's humble mug, feels as if it lingers in your hands, but lighter now, as if meant only to remind you that life always finds simple ways to sustain itself. The world around you stretches long and slow. You breathe in, and the air feels cool, like linen drawn gently across your skin. You breathe out, and the weight of the day dissolves. The river moves steadily on, as it always has, carrying with it the grain of fields, the laughter of villages, the hymns of temples, the dreams of kings. You are part of that current now, floating in its timeless rhythm. Let your eyelids lower, let your shoulders rest. The story has poured itself out, the last drop lingering sweetly on your tongue. The past has spoken softly, and now it hushes you toward sleep. In your mind's eye, the Nile glows, endless and calm, guiding you gently toward stillness. Sleep comes like cool water, like golden foam fading, like night itself leaning close.